I swear, the next time someone says it'll be an easy mission, I'm going to throw them out the nearest airlock, muttered Captain Zora Elwick, her fingers drumming impatiently on the armrest of her command chair. An easy mission, wasn't it? Snorted First Mate Grady Thrall, leaning back with the kind of smirk that made you want to slap the hell out of him. Just a quick jaunt into the Nebula Exul, they said. A walk in the park, they said. Bring your sun hat. Zora shot him a glare sharp enough to cut through hull plating. Keep flapping your gums, Grady. Maybe the nebula will do us all a favor and scramble your brains into something resembling a pudding. Grady shrugged, unperturbed. Wouldn't be the first time someone accused me of having pudding for brains. The Venture's Resolve was a ship that looked like it had seen better days, and it probably had. The walls were decorated with the kind of grime that only came from 1,000 meals eaten too close to the machinery. The seats had been patched more times than Grady cared to count, and the floors creaked like a crypt door on a stormy night. Zora tried to focus on the navigation panel, an exercise in futility as it flickered like a strobe light at a bad nightclub. Nebula Exul was known for its mind-scrambling effects. Ships that ventured into its depth often came back with tales of hallucinations, systems going haywire, and the kind of existential dread that kept philosophers in business. "Captain, we're approaching the inner rim of the nebula," announced Lynn, the ship's communications officer. She had the kind of deadpan expression that made her perfect for poker but terrible at parties. "Expect things to get weird soon." "Oh, joy. My favorite kind of weird," Zora replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Remind me again why we took this job. Because we're broke and desperate," Grady offered helpfully. "And because the client is offering enough creds to buy a new ship," Lynn added, her eyes never leaving her console. "One that doesn't sound like it's haunted by 1,000 angry ghosts. They'd have to pay me double to get back on this rust bucket," Zora muttered, but she knew they both had a point. Survival in the galaxy's underbelly called for a certain level of madness, and they were experts in that department. The nebula loomed in front of them, an ominous cloud of swirling colors and shadows that seemed to shift and writhe as if alive. It was the kind of sight that would make lesser beings reconsider their life choices, but for the crew of the Venture's Resolve, it was just another day at the office. Entering the nebula in 3, 2, 1, Lynn counted down, her voice steady as a rock in a storm. The ship shuddered as they crossed the threshold, the lights dimming momentarily before returning with a sickly flicker. The engines hummed an unsettling tune, and somewhere in the bowels of the ship a pipe clanged ominously. "We still in one piece?" Zora asked, though she wasn't sure if she wanted to hear the answer. "For now," Grady replied, peering at his own flickering console, "but the sensors are going haywire. I'm getting readings that say we're simultaneously here, 3 light-years away and in the middle of a sun." "Well, that's comforting," Zora said dryly. "Let's just hope we don't end up in the sun. Or in pieces," Lynn added helpfully. "Or scattered across dimensions like confetti," Grady put in, because why not pile on the misery? Amidst the banter and the jokes, which were more defense mechanism than humor, the ship creaked its way deeper into the nebula. The crew had faced their share of cosmic oddities and interstellar threats, but there was something about the Nebula Exul that set the teeth on edge. It was like being watched by an invisible predator, one you couldn't hear or see, but could feel breathing down your neck. "Anything interesting on the scanners?" Zora asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Define interesting," Grady replied, tapping at his console. "I've got blips here that move like they've got minds of their own. Either we're surrounded by space ghosts or the nebula's playing tricks on us." "Space ghosts, huh?" Zora mused. "That'd be a new one. We've dealt with pirates, bounty hunters, and things I'd rather not name before breakfast, but ghosts, that's a first. Joyful, isn't it?" Lynn said. She sounded about as joyful as a funeral director at work. The ship lurched suddenly, throwing them against their restraints. A rattling sound echoed through the corridors, followed by a low, eerie hum that seemed to resonate through the very bones of the ship. "What the hell was that?" Zora snapped, her heart doing a tap dance in her chest. Something not friendly, I'd wager, Grady said, his fingers dancing over the controls. Engines are fine, but the stabilizers are acting like they've got a mind of their own. Fantastic. Just what we need. Zora gritted her teeth, her mind racing with possibilities, none of them good. Lynn, see if you can get a message out. Let the client know we're experiencing technical difficulties, or whatever bullshit term they'll accept for we might be boned. Lynn nodded, her fingers already flying over the comms panel. On it, Captain. But with the interference from the nebula, I wouldn't hold my breath. Great. Just great. Zora stared out at the swirling chaos of the nebula, feeling its oppressive presence like a weight on her shoulders. The eerie hum grew louder, more insistent, vibrating through the ship with a pulsing rhythm that set Zora's nerves on edge. It was the kind of sound that made you think of haunted houses and ghost stories told in the dark, and it was getting closer. Anyone else hear that? Grady asked, his voice just a shade too casual, as if pretending not to be worried would make it true. Hard to miss, Lynn replied, her focus fixed on her console. Sounds like the ship's trying to sing us a lullaby from hell. Let's hope it doesn't put us to sleep permanently, Zora said, her grip tightening on the armrests. Grady, keep an eye on those blips. If any of them decide to get cozy, I want to know before they are on top of us. Aye, Captain, Grady said, his voice carrying the faintest edge of tension. The lights flickered again, casting the bridge into shadows for a heartbeat before stabilizing. It was like the ship itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next shoe to drop. Zora, you might want to look at this, Grady said, his tone too serious to be ignored. Zora crossed to his console, her stomach doing somersaults. What have you got? He pointed to the screen where a series of symbols and numbers danced erratically. See that? It's like someone's trying to send us a message, but it's scrambled and I have no idea how to unscramble it. Great. Because we didn't have enough to worry about, Zora muttered, rubbing her temples. Keep working on it. Lynn, can you make heads or tails of this? Lynn glanced over, her brow furrowing as she studied the screen. It's odd. I'd say it's a language, but not one I've ever seen. I can try to decode it, but without more data, it's a shot in the dark. Do it. Anything's better than nothing. Zora returned to her chair, trying to ignore the creeping chill that had settled into her bones, and keep an ear out for anything else unusual, as if anything about this was usual. The ship continued its uneasy journey through the nebula, the hum ever present, a reminder of their precarious situation. Each minute felt like an ire, stretching their nerves thin. And then, just as Zora thought her nerves might snap, the lights went out. Darkness enveloped the bridge, a suffocating blanket that seemed to swallow sound. Zora's heart pounded in her chest, loud enough to fill the silence. Everyone okay? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Still here, Grady replied, his voice closer than she expected. Though I can't speak for my sanity. Never could, Lynn said, her voice carrying a touch of humor, trying to lighten the suffocating tension. Let's see if we can't get the lights back on. Zora fumbled for the emergency panel, her fingers finding the switches by feel. We didn't come all this way to get spooked by the dark. With a flick, the lights returned, flickering uncertainly before holding steady. Zora let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, a small relief in the midst of chaos. All right, folks, she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Let's see if we can make sense of this mess before it swallows us whole. In the midst of it all, a part of Zora found herself almost enjoying the madness, the thrill of dancing on the edge of disaster. It was what they did best, after all, survive the impossible and laugh in the face of doom. Captain, Lynn called, her voice carrying a note of urgency. I think I've got something. That scrambled message, it's changing, adapting almost like it's learning. Zora finished for her, her mind racing with implications. Exactly. Lynn nodded, eyes glued to the screen. This isn't just random noise. Someone or something is trying to communicate. Well, isn't that just peachy, Grady said, shaking his head. All we need now is for it to say hello and invite us for tea. Let's hope it doesn't have a taste for human, Zora replied, a wry smile tugging at her lips despite the tension. For better or worse, the crew of the Venture's resolve was in this for the long haul. And as the nebula wrapped its ghostly fingers around them, Zora knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, with sarcasm, snark, and maybe a bit of desperate laughter to keep the darkness at bay. The Venture's resolve creaked and groaned like an old man getting out of bed when he's late for work, as if the ship itself was lamenting its involvement in this whole nebula escapade. Captain Zora Elwick sat hunched in her chair, the leather patched with duct tape and a prayer, scanning the bridge for something, anything, that wasn't trying to kill them. First Mate Grady Thrall was tapping away at his console with the enthusiasm of a man defusing a bomb with a toothpick. "Looks like the ship's stabilizers are still acting like they've been drinking on the job," he said, employing his signature nonchalance. "We're holding together, but we might end up reinventing modern art if we keep spinning like this. Modern art or modern disaster. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference," Zora replied, drumming her fingers on the armrest. "Let's try to keep the paint on the canvas." "Yeah." Lynn was still working her comms magic, trying to decode whatever garbled cosmic gibberish had landed on their doorstep. "Captain, I've got a few more snippets of the message, but they are still more scrambled than our last navigation attempt through a meteor shower. So about as useful as a chocolate teapot," Zora muttered. "Keep at it. Maybe we can at least figure out who's ghosting us with these messages." "Speaking of ghosts," Grady said, raising an eyebrow, "anyone else getting that hair on the back of your neck feeling, oh, you mean the sensation that we're not alone and someone's about to pop out and yell boo?" "Yeah, that's just called Tuesday here," Lynn replied, not looking up from her screen. As if on cue, the ship gave another shudder and the lights flickered again. But this time they didn't just flicker. They dimmed, brightened, and then dimmed again like a shipboard disco for the damned. A low, chilling whisper skated through the corridors, just barely audible above the hum of the engines. "Did anyone else hear that?" Zora asked, trying to sound skeptical instead of concerned. "Yep," Grady said, his smirk somewhat diminished. "Sounded like someone saying get out in a friendly, I want to wear your skin sort of way." "Wonderful," Zora said, rolling her eyes. "It's official. We've pissed off the interstellar poltergeist." Lynn was staring intently at her console, eyes narrowed. "Captain, there's something else." "The readings are showing shadows, shadows," Zora repeated, incredulous. "In space, yes, shadows moving across the hull. And before you ask, no, they're not Iors. Unless we've suddenly grown tentacles and started doing interpretive dance." Zora rubbed her temples, the stress pounding like a bass drum at a metal concert. "Well, that's just peachy. Shadows, whispers, and ghost messages. All we need now is a curse and we could start our own haunted house." The bridge door slid open with a reluctant hiss, and Lieutenant Arden Voss, the ship's engineer, stepped in, hands stained with grease and his face set in a grimace. "Captain, the ship's systems are acting up worse than a cat on catnip. I've got parts of the engine talking to each other like they're plotting our demise." "Welcome to the party, Voss," Zora said dryly. "Any chance the engine's just trying its hand at poetry?" "More like it's trying to write its own obituary," Voss replied, glancing at the flickering lights. "There's something connecting with the ship's core systems, something that shouldn't be there." "Let me guess, the nebula," Zora said, half joking. "Or maybe the ghosts of engineers past." Voss scratched his chin, clearly not in the mood for levity. "It could be. The nebula's doing more than just playing mind games. It's interacting with us somehow, and not in a let's have tea and crumpets kind of way." "Great. More nebulous nonsense," Grady chimed in. "So what's the plan, Captain?" "The plan," Zora said, standing up with a sigh, "is to figure out what's trying to make friends with our ship and kindly ask it to bugger off. Politely, of course," Lynn added. "Of course," Zora said. "Wouldn't want to hurt its feelings." The ship continued its journey through the nebula, moving through tendrils of swirling color that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The shadows Lynn had mentioned drifted across the hull, just visible enough to be unnerving, like looking through frosted glass at a figure moving on the other side. "Captain, those whispers," Voss started, hesitating. They're getting louder, or just more insistent? Grady asked, his foot tapping nervously. Both, Voss said. Zora could almost hear them now, a faint chorus that seemed to rise and fall with the rhythm of her heartbeat. It was like standing in a crowded room where everyone was talking just below your range of hearing, enough to drive anyone a little nuts. Let's assume for a moment that we're not all going insane, Zora said. Lynn, how's that message coming? Lynn's fingers danced across the console. I'm getting there. It's like trying to understand a toddler with a penchant for riddles. Can't be worse than Grady's poetry phase, Voss quipped. Hey, I'll have you know my odes to engine oil were highly acclaimed, Grady shot back with a grin. Right, Zora said, steering them back on course. Focus, people. Voss, any ideas on how to calm our ship before it throws a fit? Voss rubbed the back of his neck, considering. I could try rerouting power through the auxiliary conduits. Might help stabilize things, but it's like putting a band-aid on a bullet wound. Better than nothing, Zora said. Do it. As Voss disappeared back into the guts of the ship, Zora turned her attention back to Lynn, who was still hard at work on the message. The whispers seemed to ebb and flow, rising in a crescendo that made the air feel thick and heavy. Captain, I think I've got something, Lynn said, her voice tense. The message, it's a warning, a warning. Zora repeated, crossing to Lynn's console. From who, can't tell yet, but whatever it is, it's telling us to leave. Now Zora's brow furrowed as she processed that. So something in there wants us gone. Any clue why? Working on it, Lynn replied. But I'd wager it's not because it's shy. Right, Zora muttered, chewing her lip. Grady, keep an eye on those sensors. If anything starts getting frisky, I want to know. Consider me your very own cosmic chaperone, Grady said, eyes glued to the screens. The ship lurched again, a small shudder that rattled through the deck plates. Zora grabbed the armrest, her gaze darting to the viewport where the nebula continued its ghostly dance. All right, boys and girls, she said, rallying her crew. Let's keep our wits and our sense of humor about us. We're in for the long haul whether we like it or not. The bridge settled into a tense silence, broken only by the occasional beep of a console or the creak of the ship's old bones. The whispers seemed to fade, then returned, a relentless tide against their sanity. Voss reappeared, looking a bit more hopeful. I've rerouted power. Things should calm down for a bit. Good work, Zora said. Now let's see if we can figure out who's throwing the party and why we're not invited. The lights flickered again, casting long shadows across the bridge. Zora's eyes followed them, her mind racing with possibilities. They were running out of time, and whatever was out there wasn't going to wait forever. Captain, Lynn said, her voice cutting through the tension. I've got something more. The message, it's not just a random warning. It's personal. Zora repeated, her stomach nodding. In what way? Lynn hesitated, a rare flicker of uncertainty crossing her features. It's using your name, Captain, and it's urging you to turn back. Zora's heart skipped a beat, the implications hitting her like a punch to the gut. Well, isn't that just dandy? A haunted nebula with a personal vendetta against yours truly. Captain, Grady said, his tone unusually serious. This isn't a joke. If whatever's out there knows who you are, we might be in deeper than we thought. Zora took a deep breath, trying to rein in her racing thoughts. All right, so it knows my name. Doesn't mean we're turning tail. We need answers, and I'm not leaving until we get them. The bridge fell silent again, the crew turning their focus back to their tasks with renewed determination. The whispers continued their ghostly chorus, a reminder of the ticking clock. Let's hope we don't regret this, Zora murmured, more to herself than anyone else. As they pressed onward, the tension built, a tangible thing that wound through the ship like a coiled spring. The shadows danced across the hull, a silent ballet that seemed to echo the whispered warning. And through it all, Zora felt the growing certainty that something was waiting for them in the heart of the nebula, something that knew them, something that wanted to be found. But whether it was friend or foe, only time would tell. The Venture's resolve groaned like an old man getting out of bed after a long night of bad decisions, the kind you regret as soon as you wake up. Zora Elwick stood on the bridge, hands on her hips, trying to ignore the insistent whispers that seemed to be discussing which part of her soul they'd devour first. She had bigger fish to fry. First Mate Grady Thrall lounged in his chair, one foot propped on the console, looking entirely too relaxed for someone who might soon be swimming in the void. "Captain, you ever get the feeling that the universe is one big joke? And we're the punchline? Every damn day, Grady," Zora replied, casting a sidelong glance at the flickering navigation panel. "What's the status on the existential threat detection?" "Still existential," Grady said, tapping the console with a lazy finger. "Sensors aren't picking up anything solid, just a lot of cosmic static and the occasional boo." "Comforting," Zora muttered. Lynn, their communications whiz, was hard at work deciphering the scrambled cosmic messages. "You know," she said, not looking up, "this is starting to feel like one of those horror flicks where the killer's already in the house. But instead of a killer, it's a cosmic entity with an attitude problem," Grady quipped. "Exactly," Lynn said, a smile quirking at the corner of her mouth. Zora turned her attention back to the viewport, where the nebula loomed like a colorful smear across the stars. The ship shuddered again, a little more violently this time, as if it was offended by their presence. "We need to figure out what's going on before this thing decides to shake us apart." As if on cue, the overhead lights flickered, and the ship's speakers crackled to life with a voice that sounded like static given a personality. It wasn't quite human, but it was disturbingly close. "Leave now," the voice rasped, trailing off into a series of clicks and hisses. "Well, that's subtle," Grady said, raising an eyebrow. "Lynn, any luck tracing where that came from?" Zora asked. "Working on it," Lynn said, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "But it's like trying to eavesdrop on a conversation in a wind tunnel. Keep at it." "Maybe we'll get lucky," Zora said, not feeling particularly optimistic. Luck hadn't been a regular passenger on the Venture's resolve lately. The bridge door slid open and Lieutenant Arden Voss walked in, looking like he just wrestled with a particularly vicious machine and lost. "Captain, you're not going to like this," Zora sighed. "Great, just what I needed, more bad news. Lay it on me." "I found something in the ship's logs," Voss said, handing over a data slate. "Records from a previous expedition. Looks like they vanished in this nebula." Logs end abruptly. Zora took the slate, skimming through the entries. They were fragmentary, full of garbled text and ominous warnings. The last entry was simply, "We should have listened. It's too late now." "Well, that's just great. Our predecessors were as good at taking hints as we are," she said, shaking her head. "Looks like we're not the only ones with a hard skull," Grady said, peering over her shoulder. "Captain," Lynn chimed in, "I've got something on that voice. It's coming from inside the nebula, somewhere near the center. But get this, it's repeating an old Earth song. 'Twinkle, twinkle, little star,'" Zora blinked. "You've got to be kidding me." "Nope. Clear as day." "Well, as clear as it gets out here," Lynn replied. "Well, if we weren't convinced this was a cosmic setup before, we sure are now," Zora said. "Grady, how's the existential threat level?" "Upgraded to pants-sweatingly imminent, Captain," Grady reported with a straight face. "Brilliant," Zora muttered. "Voss, can we boost power to the shields without frying the ship?" Voss grimaced. "I'll see what I can do, but if this thing decides to throw a real tantrum, we might be out of luck." "Do your best," Zora said. "I'd like to avoid becoming ghost food if possible." The ship shuddered again, the lights dimming ominously before flickering back to life. The whispers seemed to grow louder, more insistent, like a chorus of nagging mothers all demanding attention at once. "Lynn, keep working on that message. If there's more to it, we need to know," Zora commanded. "Yes, Captain. Let's hope it's not just an interstellar prank call," Lynn replied. Zora returned her attention to the logs. The previous crew had been scientists, seeking the secrets of the nebula. They'd found something all right, something that had swallowed them whole. "Grady, let's assume for a second these logs aren't just the ramblings of people who've been marinating in space madness. What do you make of it?" Grady leaned back, arms crossed. "Looks like they poked the bear and the bear didn't like it. Or maybe they just couldn't resist the allure of a cosmic puzzle. Either way, they got more than they bargained for, Lin added. That's putting it mildly, Zora said. Okay, team. Our priority is to get out of here in one piece. Lin, any more on those messages? Lin shook her head. Still working on it, Captain. But whatever's out there, it's not happy. Join the club, Zora said. Voss, any progress on those shields? Voss was already tinkering with a console, his face a study in concentration. I've rerouted as much power as I can. We should be able to take a few more hits, but it's a temporary fix. Better than nothing, Zora said, nodding. Let's see if we can coax this thing out into the open. The Venture's resolve moved deeper into the nebula, the swirling colors outside the viewport a constant reminder of the unknown lurking within. The shadows clung to the hull, and every now and then the whispering chorus returned, a taunting lullaby that set everyone's nerves on edge. Zora felt the weight of their situation pressing down on her like a lead blanket. This wasn't just a scientific curiosity anymore. It was personal. Whatever was out there knew her name, and that made it a threat she couldn't ignore. Captain, Lin said suddenly, her voice cutting through the oppressive tension. I think I've got something. The messages, they're not just warnings, they're coordinates. Zora repeated. To what? Something in the center of the nebula. It's like a beacon, but it's wrong, Lin said, shaking her head. Like it's broken or corrupted or angry, Grady interjected. Zora considered this, her mind racing. A beacon in the heart of the nebula sending out warnings. Could it be what's responsible for all this? The whispers, the shadows could be, Lin said. I can try to pinpoint it, but it's like navigating through a minefield. Do it, Zora said. If we can figure out what's at the center of this thing, we might have a chance of getting out alive. Or at least find out who's been sending us these charming messages, Grady added. The ship lurched again, more violently this time, and the lights flickered ominously. Zora gritted her teeth, her grip on the console tightening. They were running out of time, and whatever was out there wasn't going to wait forever. Captain, we've got another problem, Voss said, his voice tense. The ship's systems are starting to fail. We've got critical systems going offline. Zora felt a knot of anxiety twist in her gut. Damn it. How long do we have? Not long. Maybe an hour if we're lucky, Voss replied grimly. All right, people, Zora said, her gaze sweeping over the bridge crew. We've got one shot at this. Lin, get us those coordinates. Grady, keep us steady. Voss, do whatever you can to keep this ship from coming apart. The crew sprang into action, the adrenaline of impending disaster sharpening their focus. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if sensing their determination to uncover the truth. Got it, Lin said triumphantly. I've got a fix on the coordinates, sending them to navigation now. Good work, Zora said, feeling a small sense of relief amidst the chaos. Grady, set a course. Aye, Captain. Setting course for the heart of the storm, Grady said, his tone laced with dark humor. The Venture's resolve turned, engines whining in protest as it moved toward the nebula's center. The shadows danced across the hull, the whispers rising to a crescendo as if in anticipation. Here goes nothing, Zora muttered, her eyes fixed on the swirling colors ahead. As they drew closer, the ship trembled, the lights flickering like a dying heartbeat. The tension on the bridge was palpable, the crew working in unison, driven by the shared knowledge that this was their only chance. Captain, I'm picking up something, Lin said, her voice tight with excitement. It's a structure. Artificial. Something built, not born. Zora's heart skipped a beat. An artificial structure in the heart of the nebula. The implications were staggering. Can you get any more details? Not yet. The interference is off the charts, Lin replied, frustration edging her voice. Keep at it, Zora said. We're almost there. The Venture's resolve pressed onward, the whispers now a deafening chorus that filled the bridge, a cacophony of voices all demanding the same thing, turn back. But Zora wasn't about to give in. Not now. Not when they were so close to discovering the truth. Almost there, Grady said, his hands steady on the controls. Whatever's out there, it's not going to be happy to see us. Zora took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever awaited them. Let's hope it's not too late for introductions. As they approached the heart of the nebula, the structure came into view, a dark, foreboding shape against the swirling colors. It was massive, ancient, a relic of a civilization long lost to time. And as they drew closer, Zora couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that whatever lay within was aware of their presence. "Ready to knock on the door, Captain?" Grady asked, a wry smile playing on his lips. "Let's do this," Zora said, determination burning in her eyes. With the ship systems holding on by a thread and the whispers echoing in their ears, the Venture's resolve forged ahead, plunging into the unknown. And in the heart of the nebula, the truth awaited, dark, dangerous, and more personal than they could have ever imagined. The Venture's resolve creaked like an old man's joints as it pushed through the nebula's fog, the shadow of the massive structure looming ahead like some cosmic punchline only the universe understood. Zora leaned back in her seat, the weight of command pressing down on her like a hyperactive toddler who refused to nap. "All right, team," she said, trying to keep the panic from her voice, "we're about to have a little chat with our mysterious nebula neighbor. Let's not embarrass ourselves." "Too late for that," Grady muttered, eyes glued to the flickering navigation panel as if sheer will could keep it from giving up the ghost. He'd always found humor in the worst situations, like a rat grinning at a sinking ship. "I say we go in guns blazing. It's the only language these space ghosts speak. Or maybe it's just the screaming of 1,000 lost souls telling us to bugger off." Lynn chimed in, fingers dancing over the comm system as she struggled to decipher more of the nebula's secrets. "Either way, it's going to be one hell of a conversation starter." Lieutenant Arden Voss, the ship's resident pessimist, looked up from his console like a man who'd just found out his sandwich was missing the filling. "Captain, I'm afraid our systems are on their last legs. We push any harder, and we might end up having this chat as cosmic debris," noted Voss. "I'll take it under advisement while we're being torn apart molecule by molecule," Zora replied dryly. "But let's see if we can at least get a name out of this guy before we explode." The ship continued its approach, the structure now filling the viewport like the universe's worst welcome mat. It was a jigsaw of twisted metal and darkened corridors, the sort of place you'd expect to find a murderer or a particularly unfriendly toaster. "Lynn, anything new on the comms?" Zora asked, hoping for a miracle but expecting a middle finger from the cosmos. Lynn's brow furrowed as she listened intently. "I'm getting something," a voice. "It's clearer now. Sounds human, or at least something that used to be." "Great," a chatty ghost. "Just what we needed," Grady said, shaking his head. "Hope it's not one of those needy types that refuse to let go." "Put it through," Zora ordered, bracing herself for whatever spectral entity had decided to make their acquaintance. A moment later, the bridge filled with static, and then a voice, hollow and echoing, drifted through the speakers. "This is Jax Thorne, and if you're hearing this, congratulations, you're as doomed as I was." "Well, that's comforting," Grady said, rolling his eyes. "Nice to know we're in good company." Zora leaned forward, addressing the voice that might be their last link to sanity. "Jax Thorne, this is Captain Zora Elwick of the Venture's Resolve. We're here to figure out what happened to you and your crew. Any chance you could help us out?" There was a pause, as if Jax was considering his options, or maybe just enjoying the idea of leading another crew to their doom. "Captain Elwick," the voice finally replied, "turn back. There's nothing here but regrets and shadows. We came for answers and found madness." "That's vague enough to be a horoscope," Lynn commented, frowning at her console. "Be specific, Jax." "What are we dealing with here?" "A mistake," Jax answered, his tone laced with bitterness. "We thought we could control it, understand it. But the nebula, it's alive in a way. It doesn't want us to leave alive. Like some giant cosmic jellyfish?" Grady asked skeptically. "Or more like a very angry houseplant, more like a nightmare that feeds on your fears," Jax replied, his voice growing fainter, as if the nebula itself was trying to silence him. "It shows you things you don't want to see." "Lovely. So, a brain-eating nebula with a penchant for bad dreams," Zora said, her patience wearing thin. "Can we do anything to convince it we're not worth the trouble? If I knew that, I wouldn't still be here," Jax said, and Zora could hear the regret dripping from his words like acid. "But maybe if you confront it directly, it'll have to listen. Confront it. Seriously," Voss said, aghast. "That's your plan? Talk it to death. Got a better idea, Voss?" Zora snapped. "I'm all ears." Voss shrugged, as if surrendering to the absurdity of their situation. "Not unless you count praying to whatever gods listen to lost souls. Looks like we're on our own," Lynn said, double-checking the data streaming through her console. "But the signal's getting weaker, Captain. I don't think Jax has much time left." Zora clenched her fists, frustration boiling beneath her calm demeanor. They were so close to understanding, yet the answers kept slipping through their fingers like stardust. "Jax, if you're still there, we need something, anything, that might help us survive." There was a moment of silence, punctuated by the hum of the ship and the ever-present whispers. Then Jax's voice returned, softer now, like a ghost fading away. "You have to make it personal. The Nebula knows you, Captain. It knows your fears. Use them. Make it see you're not afraid." "Well, that's not cryptic at all," Grady said with a chuckle, though his eyes were serious. "Sure, let's just invite it over for tea and a chat about our deepest insecurities." "Worth a shot," Zora said, more to herself than anyone else. "We haven't got much else to lose, except our lives," Voss grumbled. "But who's counting? Let's get ready to rumble then," Grady said, cracking his knuckles. "I've always wanted to meet the thing that makes my nightmares look like bedtime stories." The Venture's resolve powered forward, the structure looming larger with each passing second. The ship trembled as if sensing the impending confrontation, systems flickering like a nervous tick. "Prepare for the worst, but let's hope we've got the right end of the cosmic stick," Zora said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Lynn, keep that signal open. We might need Jax to come back for an encore." "Aye, Captain," Lynn said, though the doubt in her eyes reflected the uncertainty they all felt. As they closed in on the structure, Zora felt the nebula's presence pressing against her mind, a suffocating weight that threatened to drown her in its depths. She shook it off, focusing on the task at hand. "All right, everyone," she said, standing tall despite the odds. "We're here to show this nebula who's boss. Let's make it personal." The ship shuddered as if in agreement, the lights flickering wildly as they entered the heart of the structure. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices that threatened to tear them apart. Zora steeled herself, ready to face whatever awaited them. The time for fear had passed. Now it was time to act. As they pushed deeper into the structure, the Venture's resolve seemed to come alive, the walls vibrating with an unholy energy. It was as if the nebula itself was watching, waiting to see if they would succeed or fall. "Captain, the systems are going haywire," Voss warned, his voice tight with tension. "We're running out of time." "All the more reason to make this count," Zora replied, her gaze locked on the dark corridor ahead. "Let's give the nebula a piece of our minds." With one last push, the Venture's resolve reached the heart of the structure, the whispers rising to a deafening crescendo. It was now or never. "All right, Nebula," Zora said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "You know who we are. You know what we're capable of. We've come this far and we're not backing down. So show yourself." For a moment, nothing happened. The whispers continued, a haunting melody that seemed to mock their efforts. But then, slowly, the structure began to pulse with light, a strange rhythm that seemed to echo the beating of a heart. And then the voice returned, clearer than before, resonating through the ship with a force that made the walls tremble. "Brave words, Captain. But do you have the courage to face your own darkness?" Zora's heart pounded, fear clawing at her resolve. But she couldn't back down now. Not when they were so close. "Try me," she said, her words a challenge thrown into the void. The structure pulsed again, the light intensifying until it was blinding. And then, slowly, the shadows began to coalesce, forming a shape that seemed to step out of the walls themselves. It was Jax Thorne, or at least what remained of him, a spectral figure that seemed to flicker between reality and illusion. His eyes were hollow, filled with a sadness that spoke of endless regrets. "Captain Elwick," he said, his voice a ghostly whisper, You've made it this far, but the nebula doesn't forget. It won't let you leave. Zora met his gaze, refusing to look away. We're not here to be trapped, Jax. We're here to end this. Jax's form flickered, the shadows swirling around him like dark tendrils. End it or become part of it. The nebula feeds on fear, Captain. It knows your deepest secrets. Are you ready to face them? Zora's resolve hardened. She'd faced fear before, stared it down, and laughed in its face. This was no different. Bring it on, she said, her voice steady. I've got nothing to hide. The structure pulsed again, the light dimming as if acknowledging her challenge. And then slowly it began to unravel, the walls peeling away to reveal a darkness that seemed to stretch into infinity. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices that filled the air with a sense of urgency. And then from the depths of the shadows, a figure emerged, a twisted reflection of Zora herself, eyes burning with a cold fire. Welcome to the void, Captain, the figure said, its voice a mocking echo of her own. Let's see if you have what it takes to survive. Zora faced her doppelganger, the shadows swirling around them like a storm. It was a battle of wills, a test of strength that would determine their fate. And as the whispers reached a fever pitch, Zora knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going down without a fight. The Venture's resolve was shaking like a leaf in a hurricane, and Zora was starting to feel the pressure, literally and metaphorically. The lights on the bridge flickered with all the reliability of a promise from a politician, and the air was thick with tension. It didn't help that Jax Thorne's spectral warning was still fresh in everyone's mind. The nebula, it seemed, had an appetite for existential dread. Captain, I'm seeing double, Lynn said, her voice somewhere between amused and terrified. And not because I've been drinking. Wish I could say the same, Grady muttered, gripping the edge of his console like it might suddenly take flight. But unless someone spiked my coffee, we've got a serious case of the spooks. Zora glanced at the navigation panel, which was having a crisis of its own, flickering like a disco ball at the universe's worst party. I'd make a joke about things looking up, but that'd be a lie, she said, trying to inject some levity into the increasingly grim situation. Spirits and shadows won't kill us, Voss chimed in, ever the pessimist. The failing life support systems might, though. Always a ray of sunshine, Voss, Zora replied, rolling her eyes. Good thing I brought my umbrella. The bridge had become a cacophony of alarms and whispered threats. It was as if the nebula was trying to rewrite the script of their lives, adding a twist of madness that none of them had auditioned for. And now, with Jax Thorne's ghostly advice lingering like a bad smell, they were left facing the prospect of confronting their fears head-on. All right, team, Zora began, trying to project the kind of confidence that didn't come naturally with the universe collapsing around you. We've been through worse. Not sure when, Grady quipped. But I'll take your word for it. The ship groaned, an ominous noise that suggested things were going from bad to worse. Zora could almost feel the nebula's laughter, a cosmic prankster delighting in their misfortune. Captain Lynn said, her voice strained, the comms are picking up something new. More patterns, snippets of, well, it looks like memories. But they are not yours. Great, Zora sighed. Just what we need. Ghostly reruns. Maybe it's a highlights reel of our inevitable failure, Grady suggested with a smirk. I hear those are quite popular. Zora turned to face her crew, their faces a mix of determination and desperation. If the nebula was throwing everything it had at them, then they just have to throw it right back. Listen up, she said, her voice cutting through the din. We didn't come here to get spooked by shadows and echoes. We're going to hold it together, and we're going to find a way out of this. Anything's better than going out like a bad horror flick, Voss muttered, tapping away at his console as if sheer willpower could fix the ship's failing systems. Zora nodded, knowing that the crew's unity was their best weapon against the chaos unfolding around them. It was a slim hope, but sometimes that was all you had. Lynn, keep those comms open, Zora ordered. I want to know if Jax decides to give us any more ghostly pointers. On it, Captain, Lynn replied, though her hands were shaking as she worked. But I'm not holding my breath. Good, Grady interjected, because I don't think we've got enough air for that kind of optimism. As they pushed onward, the ship rocked violently, the stabilizers complaining loudly about the inhospitable conditions. The nebula was relentless, a predator playing with its prey, waiting for them to make a mistake. Grady, get us as stable as you can, Zora said, the strain in her voice mirrored by everyone around her. We've got to keep moving. Stability's not really our strong suit, Captain, Grady replied, his hands flying across the controls. But I'll see what I can do. The Venture's resolve continued its perilous journey, the once sturdy craft now a fragile lifeline between them and the malevolent intelligence of the nebula. The crew's fears were laid bare, exploited by the nebulous entity that seemed intent on breaking them. And yet, amidst the chaos, there was an undeniable resilience, a stubborn refusal to let go. Feels like we're running on fumes and prayers, Lynn said, glancing up from her console, her eyes betraying the exhaustion she felt. Don't forget duct tape and sheer bloody-mindedness, Grady added. That's what's kept us going this far. Zora managed a wry smile. If it worked for our ancestors, it'll work for us, she said, though she knew the comparison was a stretch. Their ancestors hadn't faced a sentient nebula with a taste for psychological torment. The ship shuddered again, the deck plates vibrating underfoot, and Zora felt a familiar sense of dread creeping in, an unwelcome guest at an overbooked inn. She shook it off, forcing herself to focus, to lead when everything within her screamed to run. In that moment, the nebula seemed to sense their defiance, the whispers rising to a fevered pitch, a symphony of madness meant to drown them in despair. It was a last-ditch effort to break their spirits, and Zora could see it reflected in the eyes of her crew. "Captain," Voss said, his voice barely audible over the din. "I think it's time for that pep talk." Zora nodded, knowing that words alone wouldn't be enough, but they'd have to do. "All right, everyone," she began, her voice steady despite the storm around them. "We've come too far to give up now. We're going to break through this together." The ship groaned under the strain, the nebula's energy pressing in on them from all sides. It was a battle of attrition, a test of endurance that none of them had signed up for. But in that crucible of fear, something sparked, a determination to survive, to push back against the dark. "Let's show this overgrown gas cloud what humans are made of," Grady said, a defiant grin on his face as he fought the failing controls. "Yeah," Lynn agreed, though her eyes betrayed the fear she struggled to hide. "We're stubborn bastards, if nothing else." Zora felt a surge of pride at their resolve, a fleeting warmth in the cold depths of space. The nebula might have them cornered, but it hadn't counted on their resilience, their refusal to back down, even when the odds were stacked against them. "Voss, keep those systems alive as long as you can," Zora ordered, her voice firm. "We're not out of this yet. I'll keep them alive," Voss replied, though the strain was evident. "Just don't ask me to do it gracefully." The Venture's resolve pressed onward, the structure looming ever closer, a beacon of uncertainty that promised answers or oblivion. The whispers clawed at their minds, urging them to turn back, to surrender to the darkness. But surrender wasn't in their vocabulary, not when there was a chance, however slim, of finding a way out. And so they pushed on, the weight of the cosmos bearing down on them like an oppressive tide. "Captain, I think—" Lynn hesitated, her fingers dancing over the console as if searching for something solid in the chaos. "I think I've got something." Zora turned to her, hope flaring in her chest. "What is it?" "Signals," Lynn replied, a note of urgency in her voice. "They're not just echoes, they are coordinates." Grady said incredulously. "For what? A one-way trip to our own funeral, maybe a way out," Lynn suggested, her eyes bright with possibility. "Or at least somewhere where the nebula's grip isn't as strong." Zora considered the information, weighing the risks. It was a gamble, a shot in the dark, but at this point they had nothing to lose. "Grady, plot those coordinates," she ordered, determination etched in every word. "Let's see if we can pull off a cosmic jailbreak." "With pleasure, Captain," Grady replied, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "I've always wanted to make a dramatic exit." The crew moved with renewed purpose, the prospect of escape rekindling their spirits even as the nebula fought to keep them ensnared. The ship shuddered once more, a reminder of the precariousness of their situation, but they pressed on, driven by the hope of survival. "All right, everyone," Zora said, her voice carrying over the chaos. "We're heading for those coordinates. Let's see if we can outrun this nightmare." The Venture's resolve surged forward, engines protesting but obedient, and Zora felt a thrill of exhilaration, a reckless hope that maybe, just maybe, they could make it out alive. "Hold on to your hats, folks," Grady said, grinning as the ship accelerated. "This ride's about to get bumpy," and so they plunged into the unknown, guided by the ghostly whispers of coordinates that promised salvation or ruin. The nebula's grip tightened, a living thing unwilling to relinquish its prey, but the crew held fast, united in defiance. "Almost there," Lynn said, her voice tight with anticipation. Just a little further. The ship strained against the nebula's pull, engines roaring in defiance, and Zora felt the tension ratchet up another notch. It was a high-stakes gamble, a dance with death where one misstep could spell the end. "Come on, you stubborn old mule," Grady urged, coaxing the ship onward. "Don't let us down now." The coordinates loomed ahead, a waypoint in the chaos, and Zora prayed they led to freedom rather than another trap. The nebula pushed back, a malevolent force that seemed to sense their intent, but the Venture's resolve was nothing if not determined. "We're breaking through," Voss reported, disbelief coloring his words. I think we're actually going to make it." Zora allowed herself a moment of hope, of belief that their courage might pay off. The nebula's whispers faded, a retreating tide that left silence in its wake, and the ship surged forward, propelled by a will to survive. "Coordinates reached," Lynn announced, her voice triumphant. "We did it." The crew shared a collective breath, a moment of disbelief that they'd managed to outwit a cosmic entity bent on their destruction. The nebula's presence faded, a distant memory that lingered like a bad dream. "We made it," Grady said, a note of wonder in his voice. "I'll be damned," Zora smiled, relief washing over her like a wave. "We made it," she repeated, as much to convince herself as anyone else. The Venture's resolve sailed on, free of the nebula's grip, and Zora allowed herself a moment of triumph, of pride in her crew's resilience. They'd faced their fears, stared into the abyss, and emerged victorious. But as the ship continued its journey, Zora knew one thing for certain. The fight might be over, but the war was far from won. The universe was an unforgiving place, and they'd need every ounce of courage for what lay ahead. Arden Voss stared at the blinking console as if it had personally offended him. In many ways it had. The nebula had been screwing with their systems and sanity in equal measure, and it wasn't getting any prettier. He ran a hand through his hair, which felt like straw from stress and lack of decent shower facilities. "Well," he muttered, more to himself than the blinking lights, "I think I've found a way to make these ghostly bastards stop screwing with our heads." Zora looked up from the captain's chair, where she was busy trying to look confident while their ship played the cosmic equivalent of a game of Jenga. "Is that so, Voss? Or is this another one of your we're all going to die speeches that you disguise as helpful insights?" "No, really," Voss replied, a grin creeping onto his face despite the circumstances. "Turns out the nebula's got a unique energy signature, like a cosmic fingerprint, and I think we can use it to our advantage." Grady leaned back in his seat, spinning lazily as if they weren't on the brink of space madness. "What are you suggesting? We teach the nebula to play nice with a gentle lullaby." Voss shook his head. "Something more like a cosmic jam session. We harness its energy, use the ship's modified emitters to create a feedback loop. Think of it like shouting back at the universe until it shuts the hell up." Zora raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly do you propose we do that without turning us into space toast?" "Our engineering bay has a few ancient tricks up its sleeve. Remember those old plasma coils we scavenged off that derelict freighter? We can rig them to amplify and redirect the nebula's energy. With a bit of luck, We might just turn the tables and neutralize the ghost's influence. Lynn, her eyes still haunted by the visions that had danced across her retinas, glanced over. "You sure about this, Voss?" "Sounds like an awful lot of tech talk for let's see what happens when we press the big red button." "Oh, it's definitely playing with fire," Voss conceded, "but the kind of fire that might keep us from roasting alive." Zora stood and brushed a bit of cosmic dust off her uniform. "All right, folks, sounds like we have a plan, or at least something that poses as one until it falls apart. Best case scenario, we successfully harness the energy and tell the nebula to take a hike. Worst case, we add a new dimension to our miserable existence as part of it. Always knew we'd leave our mark on the universe," Grady quipped as he started adjusting controls, readying the ship for its next insane maneuver. "Even if it's just a smear." Voss, already working up a sweat, moved with purpose, his fingers flying over the console like a crazed pianist trying to hit the one note that wouldn't get him booed off stage. "It's now or never, people. We either pull this off or we get real cozy with the idea of eternal haunting." Zora assessed her crew, each member wearing that same battered but determined look that had gotten them this far. "All right, team. Let's show that nebula what happens when it messes with a bunch of stubborn, broke bastards." The crew scrambled, a flurry of motion and noise as they worked in imperfect harmony. In the engineering bay, the old plasma coils lay waiting, dusty relics of a bygone era. Grady, always quick with a joke, now worked with a deftness that belied his apparent lack of concern. "Remember, Grady," Voss called over the comms, "if you cross the wrong wires, you might end up with a new haircut." Grady grinned. "'Bout time. I'm thinking something that really captures the essence of electrocuted chic." Lynn was deep in concentration, her fingers a blur as she modified the ship's sensors to resonate with the nebula's energy. She paused to wipe sweat from her brow, muttering, "If this doesn't work, I'm blaming all of you." "Fair enough," Voss replied, never one to argue with a woman holding the fate of the ship in her hands. With the plan in motion, the crew found themselves united in a singular purpose: survival, or at least delaying their doom long enough to call it a victory. Zora watched her crew with a mix of pride and exasperation, knowing full well that their success depended less on skill and more on dumb luck and sheer audacity. "Ready to initiate sequence," Voss announced, his voice a mix of excitement and terror. "On my mark." The rest of the crew braced themselves, a silent prayer passing through their minds. They were a ragtag bunch, armed with outdated tech and a heap of bad jokes, but they were nothing if not determined. "Mark!" Voss hit the final switch, and the ship shuddered violently, the lights flickering in a macabre dance as the ancient coils roared to life, drawing in the nebula's energy like a cosmic vacuum. The hull vibrated, a deep rumble that threatened to shake the very bolts from the ship. "Come on, baby," Grady whispered, as if coaxing an old lover back to bed. "Don't let us down now." The nebula's whispers grew to a cacophony, a chaotic symphony of sound and fury that clawed at their senses, but the crew held fast, eyes fixed on the readouts that flashed erratically across their screens. "It's working," Lynn shouted over the din, her voice barely audible. "The energy's stabilizing." "We're actually doing it," the ship groaned, a low roar like thunder, and for a moment the entire universe seemed to hold its breath. And then silence. Sweet, blissful silence. The crew looked around, almost not daring to believe it, the absence of the nebula's malevolent influence a palpable relief. They were still alive, battered, bruised, but very much alive. "Not bad for day's work," Grady said, a wide grin spreading across his face. "And here I thought we'd end up as ghost stories." Zora exhaled, a slow, deliberate breath as if she were releasing all the tension that had built up over a lifetime. "I guess we showed that nebula not to mess with us, huh?" "Yeah," Voss replied, though his expression remained skeptical, as if waiting for the other shoe to drop. "For now, at least. But something tells me this isn't the last we'll hear from it." "Let's hope it learned its lesson," Lynn said, weary but relieved. "I've had enough of playing tag with space ghosts. With the ship finally calm and the threat of obliteration momentarily averted, Zora allowed herself a rare smile. "All right, everyone, let's get this rust bucket back in shape. We've got a universe to explore and no time to waste." The crew set to work, the tension of their ordeal replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. They'd faced a nightmare and lived to tell the tale, albeit with a few more gray hairs and a shared sense of camaraderie that only near-death experiences could forge. As they worked, the venture's resolve cruised steadily onward, a lone ship in an infinite expanse, its crew a testament, not to invincibility, but to the stubborn resilience of the human spirit. "We may not be the finest ship in the fleet," Grady mused, wiping grease from his hands, "but damn if we aren't the luckiest." "Luck's got nothing to do with it," Zora replied, still watching the stars with that same mix of wonder and determination. "It's all about who you have beside you when the universe throws a punch," Voss snorted, spoken like a true optimist. "But hey, who am I to argue with survival?" Lynn, her eyes still scanning the sensors for any sign of trouble, added, "Maybe next time we run into a nebula we just steer clear." "Where's the fun in that?" Grady asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "No risk, no existential crisis." Together they laughed, a sound that bounced off the bulkheads and filled the ship with a warmth that no nebula could take away. They were a motley crew, clinging to hope and each other in a universe that seemed hell-bent on their destruction. But they were alive, and sometimes that was enough. The venture's resolve continued its journey, a tiny beacon of tenacity against the vast, uncaring cosmos. And as the ship sailed through the starlit void, its crew remained ever vigilant, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. "Here's to not dying today," Zora toasted, raising an imaginary glass. "Hear, hear," Grady and Voss echoed, clinking their own invisible drinks. Lynn simply shook her head and smiled, already plotting their next course. "Let's try not to make a habit of this yet." "Agreed," Zora said, her voice firm yet gentle. "But whatever happens, I know we'll face it together." With that, the venture's resolve and its crew sailed forward, the universe sprawling endlessly before them. A vast, unpredictable frontier full of danger, mystery, and the occasional cosmic joke. And somewhere in the depths of the Nebula Exul, the whispers faded, a reminder that even the universe knew when to respect those stubborn enough to defy it. As the ship cruised forward, basking in its newfound, albeit temporary, peace, the crew couldn't help but feel like they'd just made a deal with a particularly dodgy space salesman. Zora, leaning against the console, couldn't shake the feeling they'd just swindled the universe. Only she wasn't sure who'd been conned. The nebula's silence felt like a lull between punches from a heavyweight boxer who was just warming up. "Feels like the calm before the storm," muttered Voss, staring suspiciously at the inert control panel as if it might leap up and bite him. Grady, ever the optimist of sorts, offered a shrug. "Or maybe we've finally reached the eye of the hurricane, and it's all rainbows and unicorns from here on out." "I'll take the hurricane over unicorns," Zora chuckled dryly. "At least you can see a storm coming." Just then, an unexpected chill swept through the bridge, a ghostly shiver that crawled up their spines like a spider with cold feet. Lynn, who'd been engrossed in recalibrating the sensors, paused, her hands hovering over the console as if suspended by invisible strings. "You guys feel that?" she asked, her voice laced with apprehension. "Oh, great," Grady groaned. "Just as we were about to break out the champagne." "You brought champagne." "I've been drinking recycled ship water for the past month," Voss grumbled, glancing around as if the liquid might magically appear. Zora narrowed her eyes, scanning the bridge for any sign of the nebula's retribution. But it wasn't the universe itself that was about to have words with them. The air shimmered at the far side of the bridge, coalescing into the familiar spectral figure of Jax Thorne. His presence was as unwelcome as a tax collector on payday. "Here we go," Lynn sighed, crossing her arms. "Our ghost buddy's back." Jax's apparition flickered as though trying to find a stable frequency, his expression as haunted as they felt. "You've done well," he intoned, his voice like an old radio broadcast crackling through static. "Thanks, we've been practicing our ghost-busting routine," Grady quipped, leaning back in his chair with an exaggerated stretch. But Jax wasn't here for banter. His spectral eyes locked onto Zora's, a glimmer of desperation lurking beneath. "I'm not your enemy," he insisted, his voice carrying a note of sincerity that even the most cynical among them couldn't ignore. Zora raised an eyebrow, not buying it just yet. "You don't say. So what's with the whole haunt and terrorize routine? Just your way of saying hello?" Jax's form wavered as if struggling against a tide unseen. I'm trying to warn you. There's something worse waiting in the heart of the nebula. If you don't help me, it'll consume you." Voss let out a weary sigh. "Let me guess, something ancient, evil, and probably allergic to good vibes." Jax nodded, his ghostly visage grim. "The nebula harbors an entity, a force that devours ships, absorbs their energy, and leaves them hollow." "Sounds like my ex," muttered Grady, earning a snort from Lynn. Zora held up a hand, silencing the crew's banter. "All right, Jax, let's say we believe you. What do you want from us? And why should we help a ghost who's been rattling chains in our brains?" The specter's face twisted with long-buried sorrow. "I'm trapped here, bound to the nebula. I was sent to stop it, but I failed. My crew, they paid the price. I can guide you out, but only if we face it together. You must release me." A heavy pause settled over the bridge, the weight of it pressing like a boot on their chests. It was the sort of moment that made you reassess life choices, like why they decided space trucking was a good way to make a living. "Release you, huh?" Lynn said, frowning. "And how do we do that without becoming space sushi ourselves?" "Empathy," Jax replied, his eyes fixed on a point beyond this world. "The entity feeds on fear and anger. Show it compassion, understanding." "It's not unbeatable." "Compassion," Grady echoed, his tone incredulous. "Why not throw in a group hug while we're at it?" Zora crossed her arms, her gaze flicking between her crew and the ghostly visitor. "All right, we'll bite. But if this goes south, I'm blaming you, Grady." "Why me?" Grady protested. "Because you brought up unicorns and jinxed us," Lynn shot back, rolling her eyes. "Enough," Zora commanded, her voice cutting through their bickering like a laser scalpel. "Let's get to it. If there's a chance of getting out of this mess with all our atoms in place, I'll take it." The crew got to work, their banter replaced by a determined silence as they prepared the ship for its strangest mission yet. As they made the necessary adjustments, Lynn found herself wondering why they always seem to attract cosmic calamities like flies to a picnic. Their preparations complete, Zora signaled for Jax to take the lead. His presence barely visible, he gestured towards the nebula's heart, where the ship's instruments were already screaming bloody murder about the energy spikes. "Follow me," Jax instructed, his voice barely a whisper above the ship's hum. As the Venture's resolve drifted deeper into the nebula, the crew felt an oppressive weight settle over them, pressing down with invisible force. It was like walking into a room where everyone had just heard terrible news, but no one was willing to say it out loud. Voss, his fingers flying over the console, gritted his teeth. "This is insane. We're heading straight into the lion's den." "Technically," Grady interjected, "it's more like a cosmic lion's den with extra metaphor." "Thanks for the clarification," Voss replied dryly. "Now I feel much better about our imminent doom." Lynn leaned over her console, eyes locked on the readouts. "Energy levels are spiking, but they're not interfering with our systems. Yet." "Yet," Zora repeated. "I love that word. Always so comforting." The ship shivered under the nebula's grip, a collective exhale from the crew as they approached the core, where the very fabric of reality seemed to warp and twist like a bad dancer at a wedding. Jax hovered beside them, his form losing cohesion, as if the nebula itself sought to reclaim him. "This is it. Show it you mean no harm." "And how do we do that exactly?" Lynn asked, skepticism threading through her words. Jax's gaze softened, a touch of humanity in his spectral eyes. "Speak to it, reach out, acknowledge its pain as you would a friend's." Zora took a deep breath, stepping forward as if about to address an unruly crowd. "All right, listen up, Nebula. We're not here to fight. We're just trying to get by without being turned into cosmic dust. So if there's any chance you can let us through, we'd really appreciate it." There was a pause, the universe holding its breath, and then a shift, a lessening of the weight, as if the nebula were listening, considering. "Feel free to chime in anytime, guys," Zora added, glancing back at her crew. Grady cleared his throat, stepping up beside her. "Yeah, what she said. We're just trying to get by without becoming part of your energy diet." Voss joined them, more out of resignation than enthusiasm. "And sorry if we've been a pain, but being human and all." Lynn hesitated, then offered her own words, earnest and true. "We're not so different, you and us. We all want to survive, to exist. Maybe we can help each other." A subtle vibration rippled through the ship, a gentle hum that resonated through their bones. It wasn't the cold of fear, but a warmth, a connection. Jax's form glowed brighter, his expression one of gratitude. "You're doing it. Keep going." The crew exchanged glances, a mix of disbelief and hope tugging at their lips. It was a strange thing, bartering with the universe, but they'd always been a little odd themselves. "See, Nebula," Zora continued, her voice steady, "we're all just trying to find our way in the dark. No need for hostility." The warmth grew, enveloping them in a soft embrace. Instruments that had been shrieking with alarm now sang a gentle lullaby, their screens awash with a soothing glow. Jax's form began to dissipate, his edges blurring like mist in the sun. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice growing faint. "You've set me free." "Guess we're ghost whisperers now," Grady murmured, his voice tinged with awe. As Jax vanished, a sense of peace settled over the crew, a shared moment of triumph that transcended the boundaries of logic and reason. They'd faced the nebula, and more surprisingly, they'd understood it. The ship's systems purred to life, navigation realigning to guide them out of the nebula's depths. It was a smooth transition, like slipping from the shadow of a giant into the welcoming embrace of starlight. "Looks like we made it," Lynn said, her voice soft with disbelief. "Or we're in one hell of a shared hallucination," Voss countered, but his grin said otherwise. Zora exhaled, relief washing over her in waves. "Either way, I'll take it." As they sailed onward, free from the nebula's grip, the venture's resolve felt a little lighter, as if the universe had finally decided to cut them some slack. Not that they expected it to last. "Let's hope our next adventure is less existential," Grady quipped, settling back into his seat with a sigh. "Wouldn't count on it," Zora replied, a smile tugging at her lips. "But we'll face it together." With the nebula behind them and the vast, unpredictable cosmos ahead, the crew knew one thing for certain. They'd survived another day in a universe that loved to throw curveballs. And that, for now, was enough. "Onward, then," Zora declared, eyes fixed on the stars. "To whatever madness awaits," Grady added, raising his hands in a mock toast. "Here's to survival," Lynn said, her voice light but sincere. "And to ghosts we befriended along the way," Voss finished, unable to resist the final jab. Together they laughed, a sound that echoed through the ship, a declaration of life in a universe that sometimes felt like the worst kind of joke. They were survivors, stubborn and irreverent, bound by shared trials and a humor that refused to die. And as the venture's resolve sailed into the unknown, its crew remained unfazed, ready to face whatever the universe threw at them next. Because in the end, they were human, and that meant they were never truly alone. As the venture's resolve drifted away from the Nebula Exul's clutches, the ship's bridge was alive with a rare sense of calm. Or, as calm as you could get on a ship one malfunction away from being your own coffin. "Well," Zora mused, leaning back in her captain's chair with a creak that suggested it was as tired as she was, "I think we can officially add Nebula Whisperers to our resumes." Grady chuckled, his feet kicked up on a console, one hand casually holding a mug of what passed for coffee. "Great. Does that come with a pay raise?" "Because I'd love to replace the instant noodles with something that doesn't taste like cardboard." Voss snorted, still fiddling with the console, though now with the relaxed air of a cat that knows it's got 9 lives. "Dream on, Grady. We'd need to sell this ship just to afford a steak dinner on Mars." Lynn joined in the banter, her fingers dancing over the recalibrated sensors. And who'd buy it? The stabilizers are one hiccup away from a mechanical seizure, and I'm pretty sure the nav panel thinks it's a disco ball. Ha, disco ball, Grady said with a grin. I'd pay to see that. Zora smirked, enjoying the rare moment of levity. Well, let's not jinx it. I'd like to avoid another ghostly visitation. Jax, Lynn said, her voice softening. His sacrifice. It was something. Something, all right, Voss agreed, his usual cynicism momentarily set aside. He traded his eternity for a chance to save us. Maybe there's hope even for lost causes like us. Hey, speak for yourself, Grady protested, though his grin didn't quite reach his eyes. I'm a perfectly hopeful cause. Sure you are, Lynn teased, giving him a light shove as she passed. The ship hummed along, as though sensing the crew's newfound camaraderie. Systems that had once threatened to rebel now cooperated, the navigation paths clear and blessedly free of spectral interference. Zora tapped a finger on her chin thoughtfully. So, we've survived the nebula, released a ghost, and somehow didn't get fried in the process. What's next? A holiday, an actual holiday would be nice, Grady remarked, stretching with a yawn. But let's not tempt fate. This universe has a way of turning vacations into horror shows. Agreed, Voss said, adjusting the ship's course. Next stop, the nearest station. We've got quite the story to report. Lynn glanced up from her console, her expression thoughtful. Think they'll believe us? A haunted nebula, a spectral guide. It sounds like the plot of a bad holo film. They'll believe the data, Voss replied, gesturing to the flickering screens. Numbers don't lie, although they might bend the truth a bit. Besides, Zora chimed in, we'll make them believe. If they want proof, they can take a joyride into Exul themselves. See how long they last without a ghostly tour guide. Grady snorted. Yeah, good luck to him. As the venture's resolve continued its journey, the crew settled into the familiar rhythms of space travel. It was comforting in its monotony, the constant hum of the engines, the flickering lights that had become an odd sort of lullaby. Voss remained at his post, occasionally muttering at the console like a parent trying to coax a stubborn toddler into obedience. Come on, you piece of junk. We've got one job, don't explode. Lynn took the opportunity to give the sensors another once-over, her movements precise and practiced. At least these are behaving for the moment. I'd rather not have another close encounter of the catastrophic kind. Zora leaned back, hands behind her head. I'm just glad we didn't have to break out the emergency spacesuits. I'm pretty sure mine has a hole in it. That or I'm just really bad at sewing. Given your history with tools, I'd bet on the latter, Grady said, earning a playful glare from Zora. So, what do we say in the report? Lynn asked, redirecting the conversation. Dear Command, survived Nebula, met ghost, didn't die. Pretty much, Zora replied, her tone light despite the gravity of their recent ordeal. We'll tell them exactly what happened with maybe a little extra drama for flavor. Sounds like a plan, Voss said, finally satisfied with the course adjustments. Not that they'll pay us extra for drama. Hey, a little embellishment never hurt anyone, Grady said, raising his mug in a mock toast. To the power of exaggeration. The crew laughed, a sound that filled the bridge with warmth. It was a rare gift, the ability to find humor in the absurdity of their lives. And in that moment they were a family, dysfunctional, irreverent, and bound by the shared insanity of space travel. All right, team, Zora announced, let's get some rest. We've got a long way to go before we reach the station, and I'd like us to arrive in one piece. Or at least in fewer than 100, Voss added dryly, shutting down his console for the night. Fewer than 100 sounds good to me, Lynn agreed, stifling a yawn as she stretched. As the crew began to disperse, Grady lingered, his gaze thoughtful. You know, he said, half to himself, we joke a lot, but it feels good to have come through that together. Jax, the nebula, it was all pretty intense. Yeah, Zora said softly, her expression reflective. But we made it together, that's what counts. Grady nodded, a rare seriousness in his eyes. Here's to the next adventure, then. May it be slightly less haunted, Lynn quipped, giving Grady's shoulder a friendly pat. Here's hoping, Zora said with a smile, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the ship's climate controls. The crew drifted to their quarters, the bridge quieting to the steady hum of the Venture's resolve as it sailed through the black. They'd face the nebula and live to tell the tale. Whatever came next, they'd be ready. In the solitude of her cabin, Zora found herself staring out the porthole at the endless stretch of stars. They were beautiful in their indifference, a cosmic reminder that life went on in its unpredictable, chaotic way. "Here's to us," she whispered to the void, raising an imaginary glass to the stars. "Here's to humanity, stubborn as hell and twice as reckless." With that, she turned away from the window, already planning their next steps, because if there was one thing she'd learned in command, it was that surviving was only the first step. The real challenge was making it count. Back on the bridge, the ship continued its journey, each star a silent witness to their passage. They were far from home, far from safety, and yet in that vast, uncaring universe, they had each other. And for now, that was enough. The Venture's resolve sailed on, its crew irreverent and enduring, ready to face whatever cosmic absurdities the universe had left to throw their way. Because in the end, it wasn't just about surviving. It was about living, laughing, and finding meaning in the madness. As the ship slipped further into the depths of space, Zora felt a quiet confidence settle over her. Whatever came next, they would face it. And they'd do it with humor, determination, and the kind of stubbornness only humanity could muster. "Onward," she murmured to herself, a smile playing on her lips. "To whatever madness awaits." And with that, the Venture's resolve carried its crew forward, a beacon of human defiance in the vast, indifferent night.